Everyday me, everyday God. Frozen in the middle and meltdowns. A few days ago, I pulled a tub of chili out of the freezer and put it on the counter to thaw out for dinner. Late afternoon, I went to pour the chili into my soup pot. And I looked, and the chili looked like it was thawed. It looked like it was ready to be heated for dinner. So I picked up I picked up the tub of chili and poured it into my soup pot. And as I poured it in, I heard this thud. And inside the chili was this frozen solid lump. So I retrieved the frozen lump from the pot, put it back in my tub, and broke it into smaller pieces because smaller pieces will thaw out faster. Within an hour, I went back to look at the chili, and all of the little pieces had thawed. So I poured it all back into the soup pot, and I put it on the heat, and a gentle heat, and I started stirring it around to begin reintegrating the frozen pieces with one another to become chili again. And as it was on there, I could smell that spicy, hot, yummy smell of chili. As I was standing there stirring the chili in my soup pot, I thought, okay, chili, teach me a life lesson about being frozen at the core. Here's what I heard. Well, Elaine, we're all looking for someone to take us out of our freezers because we can't do it on our own sometimes. We need somebody to help us get out of the freezer. So I thought, well, why do we freeze in the first place? Why do we freeze stuff? Well, because it's important, it's usable, and for us personally, it might be precious. So what freezing does is it preserves and it protects. It preserves those precious parts of who we are that for some reason needed to be frozen to protect them. The frozen piece of that painful past rejection, a frozen piece of fear that we're really not lovable at all. And if anybody ever got to know us, they wouldn't love us. Or that frozen piece of doubt that we could really contribute anything of worth to that project we've been invited into that we'd love to be part of. And freezing also prevents the growth of slimy bacteria of shame, slimy mold of self-rejection. So freezing preserves, protects, and prevents. And in its place, in its time, it's good. But I think we're all waiting for someone to take us out of the freezer and really want us for dinner. Wants us at the table, wants our contribution. Actually might get excited that we would be at the table. Someone who would smile with pleasure as they smelt the spicy aroma of Elaine being present. And we all need someone to take that deep inside frozen lump and to break it up into smaller pieces. But someone who is safe, someone who is willing to wait a bit longer for me to thaw out, someone who will be careful with those deep, vulnerable, and highly protected parts of me. And we need someone who will turn up the heat gently to begin to thaw and reintegrate all that has been separated in the freezing process, to be reintegrated into that pot of chili until all the pieces of Elaine are reintegrated and fully functioning in Elaine. That way of thinking is an external source of someone helping, an external source of heat to reintegrate into wholeness again. Last week, I had a meltdown. Oh, I do so dislike meltdowns. They're messy, they're, they're inconvenient, they're ill-timed, almost always. But as I was reflecting on my meltdown, I thought, what an interesting word we use for that experience that we all know what we're talking about. A meltdown, it's about thawing, but it's not an external source. It wasn't something I initiated because I was trying to guard and protect and keep something down, and a meltdown happened. And I thought, boy, where does the heat come from in a meltdown? Well, a meltdown, I thought, oh, that's a form of spontaneous combustion. Whether I like it or not, there it is, in all its messiness, in all its truth, in all its preciousness. That meltdown exposed my frozen chunk to an inside heat, an internal heat source, a God heat, a spirit heat that melted what I would have kept frozen and hidden. But that's so like God, isn't it? God's creative intent is that I live life and that I live it to the full. And until all those little frozen parts are thawed out within me and reintegrated back in to Elaine, I'm not fully thawed. I'm not fully Elaine, living life to the full. And God desires that I live, that you live life to the full. And sometimes God's design is to bring an external support service through someone. They're going to take us out of the freezer. They're going to put us in a pot, and they're going to turn up a gentle heat to reintegrate. But sometimes God's design is an internal spirit heat source, spontaneous combustion, whether we like it or not, because it's time to thaw out one more of those precious parts that have been so carefully protected and preserved. And the reason is that, so like that pot of chili, our lives will become hot and spicy and nutritious and yummy. And maybe a necessary part of the community pot of love that God's inviting us into. So, dear friends, let's look for the spice. Let's look for those hot chilies. Let's look for integration. Amen.